Steven Chicluna. Somos los dos codirectores de este máster en Branding Online. Y con nosotros tenemos a un estupendo panel de profesionales que nos van a acompañar también en el resto del curso. Si quieres, Steven, pasamos al inglés y así empezamos un poco la mesa redonda.
Sí, bueno, as Sarah said, I will be switching a bit to English now. Okay, although there should be some Spanish subtitles coming up in the video just below where we are right now, so everyone can understand what. As Sarah was saying in the last in the brief introduction she was giving, these days brands are more global than ever, and branding has adapted to reflect the change. So it's had to move with the way brands are evolving as well. Companies are evolving as well. It's good to keep in mind though that when we speak about branding and brands, we're not only referring to corporate giants, because sometimes that's what we think. Now we think of a brand, we think of certain big names, certain big logos that everyone is familiar with. But we're also referring to young and small startups, let's say maybe release apps that can be used in every country, or even maybe medium-sized companies that have clients all over the world. I mean, branding, of course, applies to any kind of company. So as Sarah was saying, one of the main aims of the Beyond the Brand Masters course is to prepare students for any of these situations, right? And this will be the purpose of the last module of the course called Business Experience, which Sarah has already explained in another language, let's say this. In this module, as she said, we will be speaking about the way branding helps businesses, and the way it is an integral part of the way a brand functions. Okay. In the case of international companies, a good brand strategy helps it adapt to communicating its message across different cultures, and also helps attract new audiences. But how is this done in reality, and which are the teams and roles responsible for doing so? Okay, not everyone might be familiar with this at this stage. So to help us understand this better, we have invited 3 of the course's guest lecturers, who will incidentally or purposely all be giving classes during the last module of the course, which is the Business Experience course. So as Sarah mentioned earlier, the people joining us are Leanne Barros, okay, who is the head of communications at JTP LLP in London. We also have Charlie Prangley, maybe you can give us a small wave. Marketing design lead and brand manager at ConvertKit here in Valencia. And we also have Stephen Charlton, design lead at Facebook, who works also with the Europe, Middle East and Africa department in London. Okay, so guys, thanks again for joining us, and we just wanted to take some time to ask you a couple of questions, okay, which will help us shed some more light and explain a bit more what you will be offering in the course, and what exciting things await the students who decide to join. Okay, so Leanne, I just wanted to start with you. So in your case, you have significant experience working within in-house marketing teams, yeah, for global brands, which of course can be a totally different experience to working in marketing for an external agency. For those maybe who are not so much familiar with how brand management and communications roles function within a company, can you give us maybe briefly a quick breakdown of the positions that one can typically find in an in-house marketing team, and how they all maybe contribute to maintaining a brand alive?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. Hello, hi. As Stephen said, I'm Leanne Barros, and I'm currently working for an architectural firm. It's not a global architectural firm. It's a UK-based architectural firm. I'm based in London, but I've had a lot of experience of working in similar environments for global firms. So. It's an interesting thing because I think, I could say something I think now, and I feel like maybe in sort of 10 months time, it could change completely, because I think the role of marketing teams and branding very much falls within that. I think it changes very much all the time. Like if I think about when I started out 14 years ago, I know I look very young, but 14 years ago, social media didn't exist, for instance. And I think social media has changed so much of how brands approach markets and how branding is deployed. But in relation to your question, Stephen, it can be very different, I think, from firm to firm. So in the firm that we both worked together, we were Arab. It was a very big engineering firm, multidisciplinary. I think at the time, probably about 14,000 people globally across sort of every continent. And every region had its own marketing team who was responsible for sort of, I guess, deploying its branding strategies throughout that region. But essentially what you all had responsibility for is ensuring that the brand values, the brand ethos, everything that the brand stands for, its principles, those things never change. Strategies from region to region, it changes, but the brand essentially always stays the same. So I think within those in-house roles, you find sort of, I mean, for me, I didn't even contemplate, I think, having so many different sort of colleagues with disciplines that you work with. I kind of think I always saw it as everybody does a similar thing. But I think the common roles that you find sort of across these global marketing teams is, so for me, essentially, my background is copywriting. But it's content production as well. So I always sit in this sort of campaign realm, which is basically sort of, working with whoever the leadership team is, sort of looking at what the plan is, what the aims are, and sort of then sort of facilitating strategies for how you sort of basically achieve that business plan. But then also sort of within those teams, we have people sort of working across business development. So, trying to win new work. You have people who are responsible for social media, because I mean, social media is such a growing thing. It necessitates having sometimes a whole team of people working on just, creating visual content for all of the different, I mean, social media channels. There are so many of them. And I've definitely worked in firms where you had 3-4 people working across social media. And then now for me, working sort of in a much smaller role, I'm the person who's in charge of social media. So it just depends, I think, on size of company sometimes. You also have, somebody who's responsible for PR and media. So again, that's very much about reputation, and it can be sort of, many different things, but it tends to be sort of, I guess, sort of a more promotional side of marketing and branding. You also have visual communications, which Stephen knows very well what that's all about. That's essentially, graphics, visual communications, everything that falls in sort of everything visual, I guess. And then you also have one thing that, I mean, this is quite a new sort of role within marketing. I think that I've not really come across that often, but it's knowledge management, which is basically the people who, and especially really, really big global firms who, they're almost like the archivists of all of the information that you've produced throughout the years, making sure everything is in a place where if you've got 16,000 people working globally, everybody has access to all of that information. But essentially, if you come together as a team, you are all working towards the same goal, and that is maintaining a brand. It's maintaining that set of values, the ethos, making sure that people within different regions and within different markets, of course, you're going to have different branding strategies because that's just the way it is. But the brand, as I said before, the essentials never change, and you need that sort of sense of guardianship and responsibility. And I think essentially that's kind of what I see as I think a lot of people joke that with the police, and it's not this Machiavellian sort of discipline, but it's a very responsible role, and it's vital. I think it's really vital to many firms to be able to have a team that is essentially guarding its reputation. So I hope that answers the question.
That's really great, Leah. I think you gave us a really good, overview and quite detailed actually about all the many different roles that are involved in maintaining a brand and the way it's developing as well.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure we're going to hear a bit more about that in the classes that you will be giving, and the way that these operate and deal with the rest of the company as well, because I think that's a very, sometimes it might be something that is not mentioned very often, I think, especially during a course. But
Yeah.
I think what was interesting in what you said was the fact that you kept referring as well to the size of the company and how strategy and communications and the tools used. Because at the end, team, I guess, is the tool for maintaining a brand, and how these things change depending on the size of the company. Which actually leads me on really well to the next question, which I'd like to direct towards Charlie. So Charlie, you know, managing the brand of small international companies as opposed to maybe larger companies can be totally different, you know, in nature.
Yeah.
You know, between both situations. In your experience, what impact does a company's size have when it comes to brand management, and how does this affect the flexibility of its communication strategies? Does the size make any difference in this case, you think?
I think it makes a huge difference. I think that the bigger the brand, the more, and the bigger the company, the more moving parts there are to be aware of, and the more risk there is, honestly, in things going wrong with the brand. You know, when you're a small, relatively unknown company and you make maybe a misstep with a brand, is a very different impact from a huge global company having something go wrong. On the flip side to that, though, I think that when you've got a huge company and a huge brand to be working with, taking small risks that pay off can have huge positive impacts as well. So it's kind of like balancing that, you know. And I think, to answer your question about flexibility, the bigger the company, the less flexible the brand, in my experience, because there is that more moving parts in place. There's more people and more, like, you know, managers to go through to check things off, to get approval on making big changes to the brand. When you're a smaller company, you can be a bit scrappier and, you know, just sort of like go with new ideas whenever you like. So I think that organization skills honestly come in as being a huge part of working in branding, is staying organized and staying on top of all these things. And that's something that I definitely want to speak to in my classes in the course, is about how, as like designers, as people working within branding on marketing teams, that's a huge opportunity for us to develop our careers, is to build this skill and to be that person who is owning the brand and not just doing the work that's asked of us, but looking out for places within the company where people are perhaps going wrong or using the brand in ways we don't want them to be. That's our job, to stay on top of that and keep that all organized. And it makes us more valuable as professionals when we can make that happen.
That's fantastic, Charlie. I'm sure Leanne and Stephen might have some opinions on that, like, you know, both working maybe in slightly larger or much larger companies, actually, no? I don't know if you have any comments about, or any, or what you think about that.
I would certainly agree with that assertion that smaller companies being able to get stuff signed off more quickly and be able to take more risks. Absolutely true. I've worked at companies that have less than 100 people, and I've looked at Facebook, as I'll talk about in a minute, with obviously thousands of people, and the change in dynamic is astounding. Like, trying to get even the most basic of things signed off in a global corporate company is sometimes a little like pulling teeth, compared to a startup where, as long as you've convinced everyone that you're all on the same page and that it's a good idea, it's a lot quicker to prototype and get stuff out the door. So yeah, 100% agree with Charlie's comments there.
And I would have to say exactly the same thing, and I'm noticing this a lot now. So having worked in very big companies before, where actually you'd have people in the same team sitting in different buildings, and it would take, you know, you had a campaign and you had to roll it across multiple channels, and sometimes it would take, like, you know, 7 weeks of planning to make sure everybody had their piece in place. Whereas now I'm one person who controls all of the channels, and I just know that it's more flexible. I can have something, I can change it at the last minute. You don't have to go through 7 different lines of command to make sure all of these things change, and it is easier. So I think, as Charlie and Stephen have both said, like, you know, it has its pros and its cons, but things work differently, I think, across both scales. And you have to, I think, ultimately you have to just understand everything you're working with, and sort of the constraints that come with it. But yeah, it's good.
That's really interesting, right?
Yes.
And I think it's I don't know, really interesting to hear firsthand, you know, for someone who's interested in following this trajectory, you know, this kind of career. You know, there's not only the design part to think about, the visual part, but there are many more things which will come into play when you start working in these kind of places as well. So speaking about the size of companies, maybe we can keep on that. We can stay on that theme. I'll now pass on to Stephen, who works maybe in the largest company of them all, with Facebook. So Steve, I just want to ask you, like, with a global brand such as Facebook, you know, it needs to appeal to an extremely wide range of users, right? I think according to the last count I read, Facebook was being accessed by around 2.6 billion people a month or so. It's quite staggering, right? I mean, you yourself work with the EMEA marketing department, which stands for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. Can you briefly explain what are some of the design challenges involved in managing a brand across such a culturally diverse geography, like part of the world, basically?
Yeah, sure thing. I think that you've hit it perfectly with the concept of scale. So obviously, Facebook's a humongous global company. It operates in most regions and most countries on the planet, and it actually serves 3 billion people at the minute. So I'm not sure the exact percentage, but it's clocking in on half the global population, which is simply mind blowing. And as such, like the role of marketing and branding is not is as much to communicate like the Facebook proposition, the Facebook brand, the Facebook principles, but also to represent that huge breadth and wealth of people across the entire planet. And so the evergreen, like universal problem that we have to solve with every single project is like, how do you represent that global population? We can't make a United Colors of Benetton type ad where it's got like one of everyone, one of every skin tone in a utopian sort of thing for all its pros and cons at the time. Like we need to do something that's a lot more authentic, a lot more empathetic, and a lot more relatable, because effectively it is meant to be a mirror up to the world. It's representing so much that we can't we can't stylize or fake the world, because that's simply not what Facebook is all about. So I'll go into a lot more detail on the course about like how we solve for those problems on like a project by project basis, but fundamentally the answer to all of it is authenticity. Okay, so as you're building work for local regions, whether that be say a specific campaign that's happening in France, or one that bleeds out into Western Europe, or even something that has like a global presence, then you always have design localization. It could be as simple as translating the logo or the copy into a different language. It could be ensuring that the voiceovers are in the native language, making sure that languages read right to left, et cetera, et cetera. But you find that all these nuances kind of come into play as you try and localize it. So I'm sure every copywriter on the planet really likes to have like witty, clever, intelligent sort of work. And I know our copywriters on our team, they slave over lines for weeks and days to create just the right level of like humor and support and reassurance and optimism that the brand demands. And we'll all pat ourselves on the back for it. And then the minute you try and translate that to a Germanic or a Nordic language, and you realize that the pun or the wordplay just simply doesn't carry, and you're left with a really verbose Germanic sentence, which is like 15 words longer than you intended. And yeah, we need to be considerate of like all the nuances of language, of culture, of custom, just simply to get things to market. So like wordplay is a really small example, but something like Ramadan is a really big deal for us. So Ramadan's obviously a global campaign. It's not confined to any sort of region. And we generally end up shooting films or doing a lot of photography for it to try and get that like relatable, human, empathetic thing across. And we can't really mess around with who we're representing in those regions, because Ramadan as an observance in, say, Singapore or Turkey is going to look very, very different to how people observe it in Saudi Arabia. And if we mix those up, if we're putting the wrong people, the wrong facial features, the wrong local garments, the wrong environments or architecture or family roles, if we present any of that out there, then we just look like we're faking it. Like we're a big American company, no one's going to deny that. But a lot of our branding and marketing comes from this place of understanding. And if we put something in the market that's really disingenuous, then it just simply seems like well, at best we don't understand, and at worst we don't care. So we put a lot of effort into our authenticity and just make sure that we're representing as real as possible. A final example of that could be the current situation we're in the pandemic, where every region has local rules, local stipulations, local appropriateness. So whereas in the UK at the minute, things are slowly opening back up and generally people are cautious. But in other countries, say Mauritius, for example, in Spain has gone into a second lockdown. So if we were representing a lot of people out there, we definitely want it to be indoors, like social distanced, people very far apart, working from home. Whereas something in the UK, a UK specific campaign, we would be a lot more liberal in how we represent those people. So yeah, that's just a couple of examples of how there's just so much like moving parts and so much nuance into something as simple as having a photograph or a video of a person, maybe even just using a phone. And yeah, there's so many pitfalls to consider there.
Mm-hmm.
That's an amazing overview there, Jem. I think the bottom line seems to be authenticity, right? And like kind of really try to connect the brand from a very special place kind of thing, right? As special as a brand can be, I guess, with the people. And it's quite interesting that even though we speak about a brand being global, at the end you do have to go kind of focus on regions and on the local aspect of brands as well, right?
Well, at the end, branding just target people, and if we need to target these people, and we need to be approachable to these people, so at the end, it's a very human thing.
That's right. That's right.
Work.
That's right.
Absolutely, it's a good way to put it.
I don't know if you guys, Leanne or Charlie, even though you work in very different companies, I don't know if you find that you face similar challenges as well. Maybe not from a design point of view, but from other marketing aspects as well.
I think, I think Stephen basically hit the nail on the head with that. I think, I really think there are very few brands these days that will get very far without authenticity. And I think that's purely because of the way our behaviors have changed. I think as consumers, and we're all consumers, we all know we expect something different from the brands that we associate ourselves with. And, very personal to us. So you wouldn't necessarily associate yourself with a brand that you felt was being disingenuous, and that's irrespective of. I think quite different to Stephen. It's Facebook's probably more of a consumer brand, whereas what I do in architecture, it's more of a it's business to business. But essentially, the people who are buying our services, because we don't have products, they're people who want to identify with the fact that we're going to build. So essentially, we do a lot of residential housing. They want to know that the housing developments that we're working on, they come with a certain level of respect and sensitivity, and we're considering the populations that already live in those areas and how we build master plans around those areas, or whether that housing development is sustainable. I think consumers have become a lot more cautious, and they're a lot more savvier than probably we used to be sort of 20 years ago. So the expectation has completely changed. I think yes, people are very much more authenticity.
That's great.
Hearing Stephen talk about that, being able to have different photos to target different parts of the world, made me remember back to my first job working in the tech industry was for a much larger company than the one I'm at now. And we had, localized versions of our website for different regions, different copy, different spelling, different photos, all the things. And it's definitely like one of the options that becomes available to you at a bigger company is you have the resources to invest in that sort of thing, into getting like hyper local for each region that you're working in. Now that I'm at a smaller company, we just have the one version of the website, and it's kind of on thinking about the whole world and how they're going to perceive it when they get to it. But we don't have the capacity and resources to make something separate for each different region. So, you end up with those constraints sometimes when you work for a global brand, that you can't do things in the most ideal way all the time. And so you learn, little tricks for coping with that. Yeah.
You need to adapt, I guess. And this is really, really valuable thing, I think, as a professional, the capability of adapting and be ready for whatever the challenge is.
For sure, and at the end is the essence of design, right?
Yes, exactly.
Understanding the problem and dealing with it in the right way.
This is what you will learn in the course.
Yeah, I just want to say, I think that was a really good note to end on, because this, together with many more things discussed in the course, and no, it just sounds really exciting to me. Just speaking to you guys, and engaging in this kind of debate. We hope that there will be much more of this going on in the course.
Yeah, of course.
So, I think, guys, thanks for your time. It's been great speaking to you. Just wanted to hand over to Sarah to conclude the
I would just highlight some things in Spanish. So sorry, guys, I'm just going to mention that we are going to add a link to have more information in the bottom of the video. Así que lo digo en español, vamos a tener el link abajo con más información si necesitáis saber. Y no he comentado antes un poquito más a mayores también sobre la experiencia en Londres, donde vamos a conocer a todos estos profesionales en persona y en el que está incluido el alojamiento y el viaje. Así que, chicos, pues agradecemos un montón, agradecemos a nuestro panel por haber intervenido con su experiencia hoy, y queremos que visitéis la web y que os guste lo que veis. Os esperamos, espero que os guste la presentación y que la disfrutéis.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, guys. It was a pleasure to have you today.
Adios.
Bye bye.